What happens when one of Britain's most brutally honest comedians sits down with a daytime talk show host who refuses to let him speak? It only took 38 seconds for a friendly morning chat to explode into the most shocking on-air meltdown in talk show history. The studio lights were blazing hot that morning. Ricky Gervais walked onto the set with his usual confident stride, waving to the audience as they applauded. He settled into the bright orange sofa across from Lorraine Kelly, who sat perched in her chair with a smile that seemed just a little too tight. Beside Lorraine sat two other panelists. To her left was Marcus, an entertainment journalist known for stirring up controversy. And to her right was Vanessa, a lifestyle columnist who always seemed ready to jump into any argument. The three of them looked like they'd been waiting for this moment. "Ricky, welcome to the show," Lorraine said, her voice dripping with sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So lovely to have you here." "Thanks for having me," Ricky replied, settling back into the sofa. "Now," Lorraine continued, leaning forward, "we wanted to talk to you about your latest project. But first, I think we need to address something. You've made quite a career out of offending people, haven't you?" The audience went quiet. Ricky's eyebrows raised slightly. "Well, I wouldn't say that's my career," Ricky started. "I make comedy that sometimes challenges people to think differently about—" "But you do enjoy it, don't you?" Marcus cut in, a smug grin on his face. "The attention you get from being controversial?" Ricky turned to look at Marcus, his expression remaining calm. "I think there's a difference between being controversial for the sake of it and making comedy that has a point. What I do is—" "What you do," Lorraine interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp, "is hide behind the word comedy to say whatever you want without consequences. Isn't that right?" The accusation hung in the air. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm sorry, what?" Ricky asked, genuine confusion crossing his face. "I came here to talk about my new show, not to be attacked." "Attacked?" Vanessa laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated through the studio. "Oh, you can dish it out, but you can't take it. How typical." "I can take plenty," Ricky said, his voice still even, but with an edge creeping in. "But I was under the impression this was going to be an interview, not an ambush." "An ambush?" Lorraine scoffed, sitting back in her chair like a queen on a throne. "We're just asking you honest questions, Ricky. If you can't handle honest questions, maybe you shouldn't be making the kind of comedy you make." "I can handle honest questions just fine," Ricky replied, his jaw tightening. "But what you're doing is making accusations disguised as questions. There's a difference." "Here we go," Marcus said, rolling his eyes dramatically. "The victim card. Classic." "I'm not playing any card," Ricky shot back, his voice rising slightly. "I'm pointing out that you invited me here under false pretenses. You said you wanted to discuss my work, and instead you're sitting here telling me what kind of person I am." Lorraine leaned forward again, her eyes narrowing. "Well, maybe that's because your work reflects who you are, Ricky. And from where I'm sitting, you're someone who thinks he's above everyone else. Someone who thinks the rules don't apply to him." The studio had gone deathly silent. Every camera was locked on the confrontation unfolding. "That's completely unfair," Ricky said, his voice firm. "You don't know me. You don't know what I think or what I believe. You've decided who I am based on your own interpretation of my comedy. And now you're attacking me for it." "We're not attacking you," Vanessa chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're just having a conversation. Why are you getting so defensive?" "Because you're not having a conversation," Ricky replied, looking directly at her. "A conversation requires listening as well as talking. None of you have let me finish a single sentence since I sat down." "Maybe that's because every time you start talking, you're about to say something offensive," Marcus suggested, that same smug smile plastered across his face. "How would you know?" Ricky challenged. "You keep interrupting me before I can say anything." Lorraine held up her hand, silencing Marcus. Ricky, I think the real issue here is that you're uncomfortable being questioned. You're used to being the one asking the questions, the one in control. And now that someone is challenging you, you don't like it. That's not what's happening here at all, Ricky said, shaking his head. What's happening here is that you three have clearly decided, before I even walked through that door, what this interview was going to be. You wanted a confrontation, and you're manufacturing one. Manufacturing? Lorraine's voice went up an octave. We're manufacturing nothing. We're simply pointing out what everyone can see. You make your living by mocking others, and the moment someone turns the mirror on you, you fall apart. I haven't fallen apart, Ricky said through gritted teeth. I'm calmly trying to explain that what you're doing isn't journalism. It's not entertainment. It's just mean-spirited. Mean-spirited? Vanessa gasped, pressing her hand to her chest in mock offense. Oh, that's rich coming from you. Have you watched your own material lately? My material has context, Ricky explained, his patience clearly wearing thin. My material has a purpose. What you're doing right now is just personal. Everything is personal with you, isn't it? Marcus sneered. You take everything as a personal attack because you're so self-absorbed. I'm self-absorbed? Ricky's voice finally rose to match theirs. You three have spent the last 10 minutes talking about me, to me, without letting me respond. And I'm the self-absorbed one? Lorraine's face hardened. Don't raise your voice at me, Ricky. This is my show, and you're a guest. You need to remember that. A guest? Ricky laughed, but there was no humor in it. A guest is someone you treat with respect. A guest is someone you have a conversation with. I'm not a guest here. I'm a target. If you feel that way, maybe you should leave, Vanessa suggested, her tone condescending. Maybe I should, Ricky agreed, starting to stand up. Sit down, Lorraine commanded, her voice suddenly ice cold. We're not finished. Ricky paused, half standing, and looked at her with disbelief. I'm sorry. What did you just say? I said sit down, Lorraine repeated, her eyes flashing. You don't get to walk out of here just because you're uncomfortable. You agreed to come on this show, and you'll stay until I say we're done. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Even the camera operators looked shocked. You're joking, right? Ricky said slowly, searching her face for any sign of humor. There was none. Do I look like I'm joking? Lorraine snapped. You think you can just waltz in here, not answer our questions properly, and then storm out? That's not how this works. Actually, Ricky said, his voice now deadly calm, that's exactly how this works. I'm not your employee. I'm not your property. I'm a person who agreed to come here for an interview. And this, he gestured at the three of them, is not an interview. Oh, here comes the speech, Marcus muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, here comes the speech, Ricky said, turning to face him directly. Because apparently, someone needs to explain basic human decency to you people. You invite someone onto your show. You treat them with a minimum level of respect. You ask them questions. You let them answer. You don't ambush them. You don't insult them. You don't treat them like they're on trial. We have every right to ask you difficult questions, Lorraine interjected, her voice rising again. You're a public figure. You put yourself out there. You don't get to complain when people question your choices. Asking difficult questions is fine, Ricky said, his voice steady, despite the anger clearly boiling beneath the surface. But that's not what you're doing. You're making statements and adding question marks to the end of them. You're attacking my character, not examining my work. There's a massive difference. Your work is your character, Vanessa declared, as if she just said something profound. You can't separate the two. Of course you can separate the two, Ricky countered. People do it all the time. Actors play villains. That doesn't make them villains. Comedians make jokes about difficult subjects. That doesn't mean they support those subjects. But you're not just making jokes, Lorraine pressed, leaning so far forward she was almost out of her chair. You're making statements. You're pushing boundaries that shouldn't be pushed. Who decides which boundaries shouldn't be pushed? Ricky asked. You? Because you've decided you're the moral authority on what's acceptable? Someone has to be, Lorraine shot back, her face flushing red. Someone has to stand up and say enough is enough. And if that's me, then fine. I'll be that person. But nobody asked you to be that person, Ricky pointed out. Nobody appointed you the guardian of public morality. You've just decided that's your role. Better me than someone like you, Lorraine spat, and the venom in her voice made several audience members gasp audibly. Ricky stared at her for a long moment. What does that mean? It means, Lorraine said, her voice dropping to something almost threatening, that someone who makes a career out of hurting people shouldn't be the one deciding what's right and wrong. I don't make a career out of hurting people, Ricky said quietly, and for the first time, there was genuine hurt in his voice. I make comedy. Comedy that some people find challenging, yes, but comedy nonetheless. If you can't see the difference between comedy and cruelty, then I don't know what to tell you. Don't you dare lecture me, Lorraine snarled, her professional facade completely shattered now. Don't you dare sit there and pretend you're some noble artist when we all know you're just a bully with a microphone. The words landed like a slap. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the lights overhead. A bully, Ricky repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. You've spent the last 15 minutes ganging up on me, 3 against 1, not letting me speak, insulting me, commanding me to sit down when I try to leave, and I'm the bully. Yes, Lorraine said without hesitation, because everything you do from a position of power. You punch down. You always punch down. That's not true, Ricky said, shaking his head. That's just not true, and if you'd actually watched my work instead of reading headlines about it, you'd know that. I've seen plenty of your work, Marcus interjected, clearly eager to pile on. And she's right. You pick on people who can't fight back. Name one person I've picked on who couldn't fight back, Ricky challenged, his eyes locked on Marcus. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Well, there are plenty of examples. Name one, Ricky repeated, his voice hard. This isn't about specific examples, Vanessa jumped in, trying to rescue her colleague. This is about the overall tone of your work, the overall message. The overall message of my work, Ricky said slowly, is that we should be able to laugh at everything, including ourselves. That nothing should be so sacred that we can't examine it, question it, make fun of it. That's not bullying. That's freedom of expression. Freedom of expression doesn't mean freedom from consequences, Lorraine declared, as if she was delivering the final word on the matter. I've never said it did, Ricky countered. I've faced plenty of consequences for my work. I've been criticized, protested, had shows canceled. I accept all of that as part of the job. But what I don't accept is being invited onto a talk show under false pretenses just so 3 people can feel morally superior by tearing me down. Nobody's tearing you down, Lorraine insisted, though her aggressive tone suggested otherwise. We're holding you accountable. For what? Ricky demanded, his frustration finally boiling over. For making comedy you don't like? For having opinions you disagree with? What exactly am I being held accountable for? For thinking you're better than everyone else, Lorraine said, her voice cold and sharp. For thinking the rules don't apply to you. For being arrogant and dismissive and rude. Rude? Ricky's eyebrows shot up. I'm being rude? Have you listened to yourself for the past 20 minutes? Don't turn this around on me, Lorraine warned, her finger pointing at him like a weapon. This interview is about you, not me. An interview is supposed to be a dialogue, Ricky said, his voice rising again. This is a monologue with 3 people taking turns telling me how terrible I am. That's not an interview. That's a hit job. If you think being asked tough questions is a hit job, then maybe you're not as tough as you pretend to be, Marcus suggested, that infuriating smirk still on his face. Tough questions? Ricky turned to look at him, incredulous. You haven't asked me a single actual question. You've made statements. You've hurled insults. You've interrupted me every time I've tried to respond. But you haven't asked me anything. Because we don't need to ask you anything, Vanessa said smugly. Your reputation speaks for itself. My reputation, Ricky said, his voice dropping low and dangerous, is apparently whatever you three have decided it is, regardless of reality. You've created this version of me in your heads, this villain you can attack, and feel good about yourselves. But that's not who I am. That's your invention. Oh, please, Lorraine scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Everyone knows exactly who you are, Ricky. You're not as mysterious or complex as you think. I never said I was mysterious or complex, Ricky replied, his patience clearly at its absolute limit. I said you don't know me, and you don't. You know a caricature. You know sound bites and headlines. You don't know anything real about me. We know enough, Lorraine said with finality, sitting back in her chair like a judge delivering a verdict. Ricky looked at her, then at Marcus, then at Vanessa. He looked at the cameras, at the stunned audience, at the crew members who had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation unfold. You know what? Ricky said quietly, standing up slowly this time. You're right. You do know enough. You know enough to have already decided who I am and what I deserve. So there's no point in me being here. I told you to sit down, Lorraine said, her voice sharp with authority. And I'm choosing not to, Ricky replied calmly, pulling off his microphone. Because unlike what you seem to believe, you don't have the right to command me to do anything. I'm not your subject. I'm not your servant. I'm a guest who's been treated appallingly, and I'm leaving. If you walk out of here, everyone will know what kind of person you really are, Lorraine threatened, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. They'll know I'm someone who won't sit and be insulted for your entertainment, Ricky said, setting his microphone on the arm of the sofa. If that makes me the bad guy in your story, I can live with that. You're proving everything we said about you, Marcus called out as Ricky started to walk away. You can't handle criticism. You're running away. Ricky stopped and turned back, his expression tired. This isn't criticism. Criticism would be thoughtful, specific, constructive. This was just cruel, and I don't have to sit here and take it, no matter how much you think I deserve it. Coward, Vanessa muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Ricky looked at her for a long moment. If standing up for myself and refusing to be mistreated makes me a coward in your eyes, then I'll wear that label proudly. You'll regret this, Lorraine said, her voice low and threatening. Walking out on my show, people will remember this. They will, Ricky agreed, a sad smile crossing his face. They'll remember that I came here in good faith, ready to have a conversation, and instead I was subjected to a coordinated attack by 3 people who decided I was guilty before I ever sat down. They'll remember that when I tried to defend myself, you told me to sit down and shut up. They'll remember that when I chose to leave rather than continue being abused, you called me a coward. That's not what happened, Lorraine protested, but her voice lacked conviction. That's exactly what happened, Ricky said gently, and everyone watching knows it. You can edit this however you want, spin it however you need to, but the people in this studio know the truth. The cameras caught the truth. He turned to the audience, many of whom were watching with sympathy in their eyes. Thank you for being here, he said simply. I'm sorry you had to witness this. Then he turned back to Lorraine one last time. I hope whatever you thought you'd gain from this was worth it, he said quietly, because all you've done is show people exactly who you are when you have power over someone, and it's not a good look. With that, Ricky Gervais walked off the set, his footsteps echoing in the silent studio. The cameras stayed on Lorraine, Marcus, and Vanessa, who sat frozen, clearly not expecting the confrontation to end this way. Lorraine's face was flushed, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Marcus had lost his smirk, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Vanessa was staring at the empty sofa where Ricky had been sitting, her expression unreadable. The audience sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they'd just witnessed settling over them like a heavy blanket. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. They just sat there, processing the ugliness they'd seen unfold. From somewhere off camera, a producer's voice could be heard saying, "And we're clear." But the damage was already done. In 38 seconds of initial confrontation, what should have been a simple promotional interview had transformed into a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. And in the minutes that followed, 3 hosts had revealed more about themselves than they ever intended to. Lorraine looked directly into the camera, trying to regain her composure. "Well," she said, her voice shaky, "I think that showed everyone exactly what kind of person Ricky Gervais really is." But the audience knew better. They'd seen what really happened. They'd watched 3 people gang up on one. They'd heard the insults, the interruptions, the commands. They'd witnessed someone try repeatedly to have a reasonable conversation while being attacked from all sides. And they'd seen that same person make the dignified choice to walk away rather than continue to engage with people who had no intention of treating him fairly. Marcus tried to laugh it off. Can't take the heat, apparently. But his laugh sounded hollow in the silent studio. Vanessa nodded along, but she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The 3 of them sat there, trying to continue the show as if nothing had happened, but the energy in the room had completely shifted. What had started as their attempt to take down someone they saw as arrogant had backfired spectacularly. They'd expected Ricky to fight back, to get angry, to give them the confrontation they wanted. Instead, he'd remained remarkably calm throughout most of the exchange, only raising his voice when pushed beyond any reasonable limit. He'd tried to explain himself, tried to have a genuine conversation, tried to defend himself against baseless accusations. And when it became clear that no defense would be good enough, that they'd already made up their minds about who he was and what he deserved, he'd made the simple choice to leave. Not in anger, though he would have been justified. Not with threats or insults, though they'd given him plenty of ammunition, but with dignity and a clear explanation of why he was going. Lorraine tried to move on to the next segment, but her hands were shaking as she shuffled her notes. Marcus kept glancing at the spot where Ricky had been, as if expecting him to come back. Vanessa had gone very quiet, her earlier smugness completely evaporated. The crew moved around them mechanically, going through the motions of producing a show, but everyone knew this episode would be remembered for one thing only. Not for whatever other segments they had planned. Not for the cooking demonstration or the fashion advice. But for the moment when 3 hosts revealed their true colors in their treatment of a guest. In trying to expose Ricky Gervais as the villain they believed him to be, they'd only succeeded in exposing themselves. Their entitlement, their arrogance, their belief that being hosts of a talk show gave them the right to berate and command someone who'd come on in good faith. The audience would talk about this for weeks. The clip would spread if it was released. People would debate what happened, but those who watched the whole exchange would know the truth. They'd seen 3 people abuse their position of power. They'd seen someone stand up for themselves with grace and clarity. They'd seen the difference between criticism and cruelty. And they'd seen Ricky Gervais walk away from a situation that had become toxic, choosing his dignity over their attempts to humiliate him. Lorraine wrapped up the show earlier than scheduled, her usual cheerfulness nowhere to be found. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out, the whispers began. People shared what they'd witnessed, the shock still fresh in their voices. The 3 hosts sat at their desk long after the cameras stopped rolling, not quite looking at each other, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired. What they'd intended as a takedown had become something else entirely. A revelation, but not the one they'd planned. And as the studio lights dimmed and the set emptied, the question hung in the air like smoke. Who were the real bullies in that exchange? Who had really been punching down? Who had abused their power? The answers were uncomfortable, but they were clear to anyone who'd been paying attention. And Ricky Gervais, walking out of that studio with his head held high, had made his position perfectly clear without having to say another word. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own degradation. Sometimes walking away is the bravest choice of all.